All right, so we begin my post Thursday night game top 36 running back rankings. Patriots and Jets players are not included on this list or in any of my rankings. 36 through 29 are Austin Eckler, Zach Charbonnet, Ezekiel Elliott, Chuba Hubbard, Carson Steele, Jalen Warren, Samaje Perine, and Javonte Williams. All right, so at 36, I have Austin Eckler. Fun fact, he's had 47 and 52 receiving yards in the first 2 weeks of the NFL season. And so that gives him a very, very safe floor. Now, he needs to score a touchdown to really give you much upside, but that's why I would rank him as a low-end RB3. I think that Austin Eckler is going to be used quite a bit in the passing game in this game, just like he was the first 2 weeks. They're going to need to put up points to keep up with the Bengals. The Bengals are getting T. Higgins back, it looks like, for week 3. And so with them having Higgins and Chase now, I think they're going to score a good amount of points this game. With Zach Charbonnet, this is under the assumption that Kenneth Walker plays. Now, I'm recording this video Thursday night, and so Kenneth Walker hasn't practiced yet. We don't know if he's going to play at this point in time, and so these rankings are assuming that Walker does play. If Kenneth Walker does not play, I would have Zach Charbonnet right around running back 10 overall. In a full PPR, he finished as the RB8 this past week. And if Walker doesn't play, he is an absolute bell cow back. So once again, this is under the assumption that Walker plays. I think that the Seahawks will probably be winning this game. And so I think that both backs will get some action. And Charbonnet has scored in both of the first 2 weeks. With Ezekiel Elliott, he's playing against Baltimore. I think he's a decent bet for a touchdown this week. It's really not an inviting matchup. But with all the injuries on the Dallas offense, I think that they may have to run the ball or at least try to a little bit more. And he is going to get the goal line work. And so I think that he's a low ceiling but decent floor type of player. With Chuba Hubbard, he didn't do anything in week 1, and then he had a decent, right around 11 points in full PPR in week 2. Now, the matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders is inviting on paper. I don't think that he will get quite as much production on the ground this week. I think that he's going to do it through the air because I suspect that while, yes, Andy Dalton is probably an upgrade from Bryce Young in terms of the offense's efficiency, I still don't think a 36-year-old Andy Dalton is completely fixing everything. And so I think Hubbard is going to get a lot of work through the air. He had 5 targets in week 2. With Carson Steele, he no longer has to deal with Pacheco. I think that he's going to get a lot of run on the ground. He may get a target or 2, but I think that he's a decent bet for a touchdown in this game. And so while I think that he and Perine, who's slightly above him, are going to kind of eat into each other's workloads, that both are solid RB3s this week, we're just not going to have the massive upside that a lot of the running backs going ahead of both of them have. With Jalen Warren, he is better than Najee Harris. He was more efficient on the ground and through the air than Najee Harris this past week, but it appears as though they're never going to realize that, or they just don't want to use him as a featured back, or even with Najee Harris's percentage of the carries. For whatever reason, they may know better than me, but what I do know is Jalen Warren is much more efficient. I think that Jalen Warren is a solid RB3, but if he can get more work, he's going to be an RB3. He'd probably need a touchdown to be an RB2, but I do think he's going to get a good amount of work, and I do think he's still going to be more efficient than Najee Harris with his touches. With Samaje Perine, I think that he's going to get a good amount of work through the air against Atlanta. He is a bigger back, so he does have the ability to be used on the goal line. I think that Carson Steele is going to be the goal line back here. Perine is a little bit shorter and weighs more, but Carson Steele has looked really good in short yardage situations. And even after that fumble this past week, they still believed in him and gave him the ball. So I think that Samaje Perine is going to give you a much safer floor, which is why I have him slightly ahead with a relatively close ceiling. And like I said, I think they're going to have to pass the ball a little bit to stay in this game with Atlanta. I think Atlanta's going to start heating up a little bit. And Kansas City's defense doesn't look quite as good as it did this past year when they had L'Jarius Sneed. With Javonte Williams, he's against Tampa Bay. So in week 1, he took a backseat to Jaleel McLaughlin, while this past week he was the predominant running back. I mean, he received 5 targets in the passing game. And so against Tampa Bay, it's likely that Tampa Bay is going to put up a good amount of points. And so I think he's going to, as long as he is able to keep this receiving work, going to be a very safe floor back. And it is an inviting matchup, so there's maybe a chance that he scores a touchdown this week. This next tier of running backs are running backs that I think could be RB2s, but I would probably err on the side of caution. At 28, we have Zamir White, 27, Raheem Mostert, 26, Zach Moss, and 25, Devin Singletary. With Zamir White, he was a fade all offseason for me. I didn't like the hype around him. And yeah, he has been really inefficient this year, so far at least. And he's been the victim of 2 Alexander Mattison touchdowns so far. However, if there was ever a week that he was going to have a good game, it is this week against Carolina. Now, while Carolina is going to have Andy Dalton at the helm, which I think will improve their offensive efficiency, but I don't think it's going to be that great regardless, there is a chance that he gets a good amount of volume in this game because this is one of those games where there's a good chance that they're winning. And in week 1, when the Raiders were really losing, he had, I believe, a 38% snap share, which was in the mid-60s when they were playing the Ravens this past week, when they were close to the Ravens and ended up winning. And so, like I said, I think he gets a good amount of work compared to what we've seen in the first 2 weeks this week. With Raheem Mostert, at this point, it's Thursday. He was limited in practice, so I'm going under the assumption that he's going to play this week. I think that the Dolphins are going to heavily rely on the running game with Skylar Thompson at the helm as opposed to Tua. And so I like both him and Devon Achane this week. It's just, with Mostert being 32 years old, I do want to see a little bit more production from him. Raheem Mostert was hurt and didn't play this past week. So like I said, I do want to see a little bit of production from him before I move him back up with him being 32 years old. But he should get a good amount of work if he plays this game. With Zach Moss, he has been disappointing. But the good news, if you're a Zach Moss owner, is that it appears as though he is going to be the primary back in Cincinnati, regardless as to whether they're winning or losing. And so I think this is a game where he gets a good amount of volume and is a decent bet for a touchdown. In fact, Devin Singletary just ran for 95 yards and a touchdown against Washington, so I think that Zach Moss is a decent bet for a touchdown. With Devin Singletary, he's coming off a 95-yard rushing game with a rushing touchdown. Against Cleveland, admittedly, it is not the most inviting matchup, but the Giants are going to do anything they can to make sure that Daniel Jones does not have the ball very long, because Myles Garrett is coming for Daniel Jones. I predict he'll probably get at the least 2 sacks this game. And so I think that they're going to do a lot of quick passes to Malik Neighbors. I think they are going to get Theo Johnson involved, but I do think we see a heavy amount of work for Devin Singletary this week. It's just, in this offense, the upside is kind of limited with him. All right, so this next tier of running backs are running backs that I think have a possibility of cracking the top 15, although I don't think they're going to be RB1s this week. At 24, we have DeAndre Swift, 23, Brian Robinson Jr., 22, Najee Harris, 21, J.K. Dobbins, 20, David Montgomery, 19, Jerome Ford, and 18, Tony Pollard. All right, so at 24, we have DeAndre Swift. He's playing the Colts. Now, it's a very inviting matchup to begin with, but they also just placed defensive tackle DeForest Buckner on injured reserve, and that is exactly what the Bears need to get their run game going. I understand if you're skeptical about this, but if there was ever a game that you're going to trust the Bears offense in any shape or form, it's this week against the Colts. Now, while I'm not heavily advising or really particularly high on most of the Bears offense this week, I do think that out of all of these assets, DeAndre Swift is the best bet to have a decent week. With Brian Robinson Jr., he's been very good this season. both him and Eckler actually have been a very good duo together. Against Cincinnati, it is not the most inviting matchup. I think if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's going to disappoint people. But if he does score a touchdown, I think he's right around the RB 20 to 23, give or take, with the opportunity, if he happens to have a long touchdown, of finishing as a top 15 back. But against Cincinnati, it really is not the most inviting matchup. With Najee Harris against the Chargers, he's been much less effective than Jaylen Warren, but they still give him the volume anyways, and so he is the preferred option for us in fantasy. He's a decent goal line back. Now, against the Chargers, it's not the most inviting matchup. I think they're going to do a lot of running of the football, though, so that Justin Fields doesn't get sacked over and over again by Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa. And so I think he's a very safe floor play, and if he happens to get a touchdown, he has a chance to finish inside the top 20. With J.K. Dobbins, he's been very, very good so far. I do think that this is a very tough matchup, however. Pittsburgh is not a joke on defense. TJ Watt single-handedly destroyed Atlanta. He is a force to be reckoned with. Their defense overall is very good, and so this is probably the worst matchup he's going to have pretty much the entire season. And so I don't like J.K. Dobbins as much as I have and will continue to like him in other weeks. But he's still going to get a good amount of volume. I just think his efficiency isn't going to be what it has been the first 2 weeks, and I don't like his chances of getting a touchdown nearly as much this week in particular. With David Montgomery against Arizona, I think that the Lions are going to put up a lot of points, and so I think he's a very safe floor play. He's just one of those running backs that if he happens to get a touchdown, which there's a decent chance, he's a good play, but he's kind of more of a safe floor, somewhat limited upside type of play. But regardless, there is a decent chance he scores against Arizona this week. With Jerome Ford, I like him against the Giants this week. I think that he's a decent floor play for you. I think there is a good chance that he gets a touchdown. The Giants' defense is very bad. And the Browns are probably not going to want Deshaun Watson throwing if they don't have to. And so I think that he is going to cede some work to Dante Foreman. But I think out of him and Foreman, he's clearly the preferred fantasy play for us this week. With Tony Pollard against Green Bay, this is a very inviting matchup. There's a chance that he has a big game this week. I think he probably gets a touchdown this week. I just think that Green Bay's defense is going to be a little bit tough on Will Levis. And so I think they're going to force a lot of drives to stall. But I do think he's a good bet for a touchdown. If you like what you're seeing so far, feel free to like and subscribe. It lets me know that you want to see more content like this, and it's a free and easy way to help support the channel. Thanks. All right, so this next tier of running backs are running backs that I think are probably mid RB2s to potentially low-end RB1s. At 17, I have Kyren Williams, 16, Rachaad White, 15, Aaron Jones, 14, Travis Etienne, 13, Derrick Henry, 12, Kenneth Walker, and now this is under the assumption that he plays. He has not practiced yet, so if he were to miss the game, I would probably put Zach Charbonnet right around there, maybe ahead of James Cook, because he was a top 10 running back this past week, and it's an inviting matchup. But James Cook at 11 and Joe Mixon at 10. With Kyren Williams, I think he's a very good bet to get a ton of volume. The Rams are without Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp now, as well as multiple starting linemen. And so, but I do think he's going to get a lot of volume. I think he's a good bet to get at least 5 receptions this week because that 49ers pass rush is going to be absolutely ferocious, and they're going to want to get the ball out of Matt Stafford's hands rather quickly so he doesn't get hurt. And so I do think he's a very, very safe floor play. Admittedly, though, he probably does not have the ceiling that he would normally have because the offense is probably going to be a little bit more dysfunctional than normal. With Rachaad White, he was limited with a groin injury, but he did practice. It's an inviting matchup against Denver. I think that Rachaad White is a very safe floor play due to his likelihood to get a lot of receptions and passing work. But he's a very limited ceiling player because unless he gets a ton of volume, he's very inefficient on the ground and one of the worst rushers of the football in the NFL. And so against Denver, once again, it's an inviting matchup, so I think he's a very safe floor play. And if he happens to get a touchdown this week, he has a chance to finish a little bit higher than that. With Aaron Jones, it's not an inviting matchup against Houston. However, it is going to be probably a high-scoring game between the Vikings and the Texans. And so I think that Aaron Jones is a very safe floor play this week. I just think that he's going to have better games in terms of his ceiling. But yeah, I think he's going to get fed a decent amount this game and get quite a few receptions. With Travis Etienne, this is one of the best weeks to play Etienne. Buffalo's run defense is not very good. Now, unfortunately for Etienne, the Jacksonville Jaguars offensive line isn't very good either. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But if there was really a week that you want to play Etienne, it's this week. Now, Tank Bigsby was hurt during a kickoff this past week in week 2, and he was limited in practice, but I really don't think they're going to want to give him a ton of work this week coming off that injury. And so I think that Etienne is a good bet to get a ton of volume in this game, and a decent bet for a touchdown as well. With Derrick Henry against Dallas, it's an inviting matchup. I think the Ravens are probably going to want to ground and pound the ball this week so they can keep control of the time of possession. And so I think Derrick Henry is a very good bet to have one touchdown this week with the opportunity for multiple touchdowns as the Ravens try to control this game. And so I think he isn't necessarily the best floor running back, but he's a decently high ceiling because he's going to get a good amount of work, I suspect, this week. With Kenneth Walker against Miami, he's not practiced yet, so if he were to not play, obviously he's not going to be in these rankings at all, but if he does play, it's against Miami. Miami is going to be without Tua, and so I think the Seahawks are going to try to run the ball to ground and pound and control the clock, just like I think the Ravens will, and it's a very inviting matchup, so if he does play, I really like him this week. With James Cook against Jacksonville, he has these random blow-up games where he just goes off. And then he has a lot of games where he's fine. And so the good news is he's a very, very safe floor running back. And hey, maybe he has another blow-up game. And because he is playing Jacksonville, who is very poor against the run, I think that there is a good chance that he has one of those blow-up games once again. And so I do like James Cook this week. With Joe Mixon, he has not practiced yet, so there is a chance he doesn't play in this game. But if he does play, I think he's a decent bet for a touchdown. Now, he was hurt in week 2, but he's looked really good this year on the ground for the Texans. And so I think that he's a very, very good play despite the tough matchup against Minnesota if he does end up suiting up this week. All right, so running backs that I think are probably going to be RB1s are Jonathan Taylor and James Conner. Now, Jonathan Taylor has not been great so far. I think this is a get-right game. They're going to want to take the ball out of Anthony Richardson's hands as much as they possibly can. Chicago's pass defense is absolutely scary. I mean, CJ Stroud looked mortal against them at times, and CJ Stroud is amazing. And so I think that Jonathan Taylor is going to get a ton of volume. I think they're going to want to run the ball as much as they can with him and A-Rich in order to make sure that Chicago isn't on the field. And so I think he's a very, very good bet for a touchdown this week, and I think he probably cracks 100 yards as well. With James Conner against Detroit, it is not an inviting matchup. However, it's James Conner. We all know that he's really good. It's just a matter of how long is he going to stay healthy. And so as long as he stays healthy, he's probably an RB1 just about every week. He's a very safe floor, very high ceiling play. It's just not a good matchup, so there are a couple of running backs that I would still prefer over him. Running backs that I think are solid RB1s to elite RB1s this week are Josh Jacobs at 7, Jordan Mason at 6, Bijan Robinson at 5, Jahmyr Gibbs at 4, Devon Achane at 3, Saquon Barkley at 2, and Alvin Kamara at 1. All right, so with Josh Jacobs, he's been limited this week, but he is practicing, and so I think his chances of playing are pretty good. They're playing against the Titans. Now, Jordan Love did have a limited practice, so there is a chance that he plays this week. If Jordan Love plays, I think that improves the offensive efficiency and gives him a much better chance at scoring touchdowns. But if Jordan Love doesn't play, I think he's going to get even more volume. And so I think he's a fantastic start no matter what the scenario is at quarterback. Against the Titans, their offense has looked pretty bad. Will Levis is playing as though he's one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL right now. And so it really doesn't matter, in my opinion, as to who their quarterback is this week between Jordan Love and Malik Willis. I think he's a great bet this week, and I think he probably gets over 100 yards and a touchdown. With Jordan Mason, the difference between him and Christian McCaffrey isn't even that much. I mean, McCaffrey is generally going to be the first running back in everybody's rankings when he's fully healthy, but That's really not that much of a dip we've seen, and he's getting all of the work. I mean, Grendo, I believe he only had one touch this past week, and in week one, Garendo didn't even get a touch. He was on the field for one play. They called a timeout, and then they put Jordan Mason back in. And so, with him getting all of the work and in a smash spot against the Rams, I really like him as an RB1 this week. The Rams' offense is probably going to be a little bit worse than we would normally see with Cooper Kupp and Puka being out, as well as multiple offensive linemen. And so I think they're going to ground and pound and try to salt the game away because they also are going to be without Deebo Samuel this week. With Bijan Robinson, we have not seen the ceiling that we're going to see at some point from him this season. Against Kansas City, though, I think he's going to get involved in the passing game quite a bit. I think that Kansas City is going to be beating Atlanta. And so I think that he is a very, very decent bet to have about 5 to 6 receptions this week, giving him a very safe floor. And if he happens to score a touchdown for the first time this season, he's probably going to put up a pretty good amount of points. With Jahmyr Gibbs against Arizona, I think this is a smash spot for him. I think he's probably going to finish with around 100 total yards, probably 5 to 6, maybe even 7 receptions this game, and I think he's a decent bet for a touchdown. And so I think he's a very safe floor, pretty high upside play this week. With Devon Achane against Seattle, now their offense, this ranking is a little bit tricky. Here's how I think it's going to play out. I think they're going to rely a lot more on their running backs in the short area of the passing game, and I think he's going to get a very good amount of total volume, and I think a lot more of it than normal is going to be through the air. I think they're going to use the short passing game as an extension of the run game this week so that Skylar Thompson doesn't have to do too much for himself. And so I think that Devon Achane is a fantastic running back this week. I think he's going to get a good amount of volume. And even though Seattle isn't the most inviting of matchups, I think he's also a decent bet to get a touchdown. With Saquon Barkley against the Saints, it's not an inviting matchup, but it's such a high-powered offense. Saquon Barkley's still an elite running back. I think he's going to get a good amount of volume again, and I think that he's also a good bet for around 100 total scrimmage yards, and I think he probably has a touchdown this week as well. With Alvin Kamara against Philadelphia, it's an inviting matchup. He's been by far the best running back in fantasy football. I did manage to lose a week with Alvin Kamara in my lineup somehow. It was very depressing, honestly. But yeah, Alvin Kamara has been absolutely fantastic. This new Kubiak offense has been incredible. I was not high on much of the Saints offense in particular. I was still high on Kamara, but not this high. Boy, if you bought into this offense, especially with Kamara, Rashid Shaheed, and even if you have Carr, you're really eating. So I think he's a decent bet to repeat as the RB1, but I wouldn't bet on another 40 or so point game. But I think a 30-point game is easily within the realm of possibilities here. But I think he'll probably be right around 18 this week. But I think he's a good bet for a touchdown. All right, so running backs that I think are probably RB3s are Austin Eckler, Zach Charbonnet. Now, with the Zach Charbonnet ranking, once again, it's under the assumption that Kenneth Walker is able to play this week. If Kenneth Walker does not play this week, I think Zach Charbonnet is probably right around RB10. But if Kenneth Walker is able to play, I think that he's the preferred back. Then we have Zeke Elliott, Chuba Hubbard, Carson Steele, Jalen Warren, Samaje Perine, and Javonte Williams. Running backs that I think have a chance to be RB2s, but I would put just outside that are Zamir White, Raheem Mostert, Zach Moss, and Devin Singletary. Running backs that I think are probably RB2s, admittedly mid to low end RB2s, are DeAndre Swift, Brian Robinson Jr., Najee Harris, J.K. Dobbins, David Montgomery, Jerome Ford, and Tony Pollard. Running backs that I think are probably mid RB2s to potentially low end RB1s this week are Kyron Williams, Rashad White, Aaron Jones, Travis Etienne, Derrick Henry, Kenneth Walker if he's able to suit up, James Cook, and also Joe Mixon if he's able to suit up this week. Running backs that I think are pretty safe RB1s are Jonathan Taylor. I think this is a bounce back for him. He hasn't been great, but this is a smash spot. James Conner, he's been amazing. Running backs that I think are very safe RB1s with the potential to be top 3 options are Josh Jacobs, Jordan Mason, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, Saquon Barkley, and Alvin Kamara. All right, so that concludes my running back rankings for week 3. Once again, you're seeing this on Friday, so you would already know that Breece Hall and Ramondre Stevenson had played their game on Thursday night, but that's why they're not included in these rankings. All right, so who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Who am I missing from this list entirely? Please let me know below in the comment section and let me know why. With that being said, feel free to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I plan on doing projections for every single game, every NFL quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, and making rankings based off of these projections. And if you like what you're seeing, please like and subscribe. It lets me know that you want to see more content like this. I plan on doing these every single week. Thank you, and have a good day.